Welcome to The Passion Pod with your host, Chris Johnson. Thanks for joining us. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy the feature presentation.
Welcome back, friends. Today I traveled to New York City. We're over in Brooklyn, and this fancy place that we're at is actually my sister's. She's also from Eau Claire, Wisconsin, but she works for Google now. She's traveled all over, and she decided to settle here in Brooklyn, New York. And I get to come and visit for free. I reached out to my guest today, probably 6 months or so ago. Saw a video part come online, and I was like, man, this was so good. I've seen every video part, but this one was really good. So I just DM'd him like, yo, that was a dope part. What's the random chances that you would do an interview? And he was like, yeah, absolutely, I would do an interview. And here we are 6 months later out in New York. Welcome to the show, Walker Ryan.
Thanks for having me. Hyped it came together.
Dude, yeah, me too. And then you had another video part come out after that. That textures part was ridiculous.
Thank you. Yeah, that first one you liked actually was kind of like the throwaway. Like, oh, I got to figure out something to do with the footage I'm not going to use. So I appreciated that you even watched it.
Dude, I'm a huge skate nerd. Like, I've been skating my whole life. I started skating when I was like 9 or 10, maybe. I was one of those kids. You're probably similar time frame. Of like the first Tony Hawk video came out. And I don't want to say that's why I started skating because I don't really remember, but everyone started skating around that time frame because everyone wanted a board.
Yeah.
And then most people realized it was hard, and then within 6 months never used their board. Except
Totally.
I kept doing it and doing it and doing it, and now it's been 23 years and I can't switch tray anymore. I did once upon a time when I was 18. I landed a few.
Hey,
Promise.
there you go.
I swear to God, not quite as good as you. Well, anyway, so you're from Northern California, and you've been a pro skateboarder for a long time now, and you've kind of transitioned into doing a lot of things, which we'll get to it. But where exactly in California are you from?
So I'm from a small town called St. Helena, and it's in kind of the heart of the Napa Valley. So my father was a winemaker. He's now deceased, but he, that's like, where to be if you want to make wine. And it's a interesting place if you ever get to pass through. It's tiny. I mean, the town I grew up in, 5,000 people. Napa itself is a little bigger, but it's hour from San Francisco, and it's a tourist destination.
What was the skateboarding scene like in your particular town? 5,000 is really, really small. There wasn't a skate shop or anything then, I assume.
No skate shop, and just a few older guys I was kind of scared to talk to, and then eventually a couple of my friends. I would sort of force my friends to like skate because I became obsessed at like 7 basically.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until like middle school, late elementary school that I got a crew, and then
Sure.
I always had people to skate with. A lot of those friends stayed skating to this day. No one really took it super seriously. I had one friend who got sponsored around the same time I did.
How old were you at that point?
My first sponsor?
Yeah.
About like 14, 13,
okay.
when I started getting like some free boards from a local company. It was actually based in Oakland, owned by Ron Allen, who's a very legendary skater. He's like 60 now and still ripping. He's so sick. And then, that was, it was more about venturing into the Bay Area later, where I started making more connections and getting a broader like skate community.
Weren't your parents uncomfortable with you just like going out to San Francisco when you were in high school? It's kind of a gnarly city.
Well, they were both born there, and they both, once I had a license, it was like, yeah, for sure. And I made friends who were older that I would just crash with, more so in the East Bay, like Berkeley and Oakland. But they were the ones who would bring me into the city to skate when I was a little kid. And so they both had an affinity for the city and just like wanting me to explore it as well. So,
yeah. How did it work as far as like by the end of high school? Because I know you ended up going to college, which is a pretty rare thing. A lot of pro skateboarders don't even graduate high school for that matter because they have so many travel things going on. But I feel like when I saw your name really come up, like pro skateboarding wise, you weren't one of those people that was 16 all of a sudden traveling with Red Bull and all that type of stuff. How did that work with traveling? Were you already going on trips while you were in high school? Did all that stuff kind of come later? How did you do schooling? Did you do a lot of like online college? How did you do that?
So I was never formally sponsored, meaning like contracts and getting paid until basically my second year of college. So until that point, it was just people sending me free stuff, shoes, boards, whatever. But since there was no, real sign of a career, I wasn't about to not go to college to pursue this thing, my parents were like, no, like no
Right.
way. Even though in my dreams I was like, yeah, but like it could work out. So I was on the college track, went down to San Diego because it was the best school I got into. And that really ended up being the best place to be at that time. Like I had the Bay Area skate community and there was something building there, but it wasn't until that I was in San Diego that I made real skateboarding in person connections with the people who were actually sending me boards, which was the KO Corp and Organika. And so I started making a little money, and really trips weren't popping off too much because that was like 2008, 2009. And a lot of those companies that had been just like flying all over the world were kind of like pumping the brakes. And so really it was just skating in San Diego that were my trips. So it was like weekends, you know, and after class, and like I would eventually figure out how to block my schedule. So Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday were just crunch time classes. And then I would just have 4-day weekends to skate San Diego. So it was kind of like a 4-year skate trip for me.
Sure. I feel like I remember you having an article early on. Like I think the first time I remember seeing your name in a magazine, because again, I'm a big skate nerd. I've read Thrashers since I was a little kid.
Yeah.
And I was in college. I'm not that much younger than you. So I remember being in college and reading an article about it and saying like Walker Ryan, this college skateboarder, whatever. And I think I remember reading an article talking about you skating campus when you're not in classes or something. Was there an article that came out like that?
Yeah, definitely. I think it was a Trans World.
Yeah, that sounds right.
20 questions or something. Yeah, I was really psyched to get footage on campus as well. And that was another like big surprise. Like I knew San Diego. I didn't really even know the difference between San Diego and LA. From my perspective, it was just Southern California. It was all one big blob of an area.
Yeah.
So I didn't realize San Diego, the school I got into had all these skate spots. So I got there and it's just like a massive campus. It's basically a little city. And I was just day one, like, oh my God, this is going to be so fun. Like videos that I grew up watching, like a lot of them were filmed on that campus and the spots were still there. And for whatever reason, people had been sort of scared to skate that school for like the 10 years before I'd gotten there. Like they weren't, but it was just such a high bust, and there'd been bad stories of cops like giving serious tickets and whatnot. So people kind of just like shied away. Whereas like I was living on campus, I could kind of just roll with a small crew and just get a lot done. And so I think that was sort of like, it was kind of a weird way to be marketed in a sense. Like, oh, dude who's 19 going to college, like, whoa, shocking. But I guess in the skate industry, it was uncommon. And then the fact that I was skating spots on my campus sort of added a layer of like intrigue or story, you know? So it was fun for me because I didn't have a car, and it was like, well, I got a video part worth of spots right here on my campus.
Yeah.
Filmer, homie, come through. Let's do this.
What were you going to school for? What was your idea if pro skateboarding wasn't going to be it? Was it like writing? Was it English major?
No, it actually wasn't writing at all. I was just I didn't decide my major until like the last second, and I ended up with sociology, mainly because at that point I had already started getting paid from skating and the career aspect was looking a little more promising. So I was more thinking, what's a good general education that like will kind of inform me about the world, since if this works out, I want to travel as much as possible, and this is a pretty straight liberal arts education, Bachelor of Arts degree. I was just kind of like, I liked the classes I took. I happened to take a couple upper divs before lower divs, and they were just really interesting, like the history of South Africa, but from a very specific lens, and like classes like that I just thought were great. And so that's what I stuck with. And I will admit there was a lower count of credits needed. It was on the low, and I wanted to get done as soon as possible. And even when I finished the degree requirements, I still had pending units that I needed to do, and I did that at community college because UC San Diego is a public school, but it still has a pretty high like tuition fee thing. So once I was done with all the requirements for the degree, I just like went to community college and banged out some electives.
Sure. But you're a smart guy, and like a brand like Organika, regardless of KO doing well, especially as DGK was really popping, Organika was still not like the flagship brand that was really paying with clothing or anything else for that matter.
Right.
I'm sure you knew at that point, you were looking at the other kids that were coming up, the people that were gonna make like career kind of money, like long-term money, those were the people that were already sponsored and pro when they were your age by that point or earlier, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So getting on and starting to get paid by a company like Organika as you're getting out of college, I'm sure there still must have been the thought process of like, okay, well, this isn't going to last forever, and this probably isn't money that's going to last me forever. So what was the thought process of like, what am I going to do? You must have at that point already known by the time you're in your 30s, at some point there's going to have to be a transition of something.
Yeah.
What were you thinking at that point? Or were you just tunnel vision, like, I'll just be a pro skater and figure it out?
It wasn't that I was tunnel vision. It was more like, if I'm going to apply myself in this industry, that will be sort of a business education of its own. And when my time as a active skateboarder is over, maybe I'll go back to school. Hopefully I'll absorb something from this industry that I've learned. I wasn't ever under the like delusion that I would make tons of money from skating and be set. But I was in a camp, not just with Organika, which was paying me decently, but I was on Circa, and I was like kind of getting in line to like get a pro model shoe for Circa. And in my life as an observer of the skate world, Circa was huge. And so a shoe on Circa could mean like, well, like, you know, being well paid if it hits. And if even if it doesn't hit, it's just sort of like a real substantial thing. And so what I wasn't expecting was Circa to like basically go under a year after I was done with college.
Yeah. And that was when you were like 23-ish, something like that. Yeah. I mean, at the time, this was before like Nike and all the major brands, you know, sporting goods brands have taken over. But at that point in time, really, I mean, you go back and you look at like the Tony Hawk Underground, and when you got your shoe contract was when you like made it as a pro, because that's really how it was. Any like significant pro pretty much had a shoe model under them like all the time. Yeah. And obviously now that's not the case. People just get colorways for the most part. But at the time, that was like how you made your money. Right. So when that came through, or when that fell through, what did you do? Like, did you look for another shoe sponsor right away, or did it kind of like...
When Circa fell through?
Yeah, like what were your plans with your career at that point? Where you're like, well, I guess I'll just keep skating and see what happens at this point? Or were you actively like feeling the pressure of I have to find another shoe deal right away?
I mean, definitely. I put the feelers out there. I started skating Adidas, and then S actually offered me a shoe contract. They were coming back. And then I rode for S for like a year and a half, but they were sort of like shifting their program around. And then it was, you know, again, like, oh, in no sponsorship land, I guess I'll skate Converse. And then DVS offered me something. So there were always little shoe deals that would pop up.
Sure.
Which was, you know, by that point, we're moving forward quite a bit, right, but I was already thinking, okay, this is like a really insecure feeling in this industry of just like losing contracts at the drop of a hat, things that I expected to last like 5-10 years, just like boom, suddenly, nope, we can't pay you, or nope, it's sorry, like we don't want to pay pro skaters anymore. We're just going to like give you royalties on shoes that may or may not sell. So I had already started my brand Old Friends as sort of like a way to give myself some real work experience that I wasn't getting just as an independent contractor skateboarder guy. So that was, you know, from production, marketing, and just building out a brand essentially.
What was the goals with Old Friends specifically? What did you want to achieve with it? I mean, a lot of times when you start a business, it sounds like money wasn't really the focus. It was more like learning all the different aspects of it. But I'm sure you had some business sense going into it of like, I don't want to just screw around with it. I would like to accomplish something.
Totally. I mean, yeah, we were initially just thinking like, you know, hats and clothing and apparel. And, you know, it never really like hit in a big way, but it definitely, I mean, we hit the goals we wanted to. We wanted to like get in local skate shops. We wanted to get in Zoomies. We wanted to like, you know, do collaborations with brands like Spitfire, Grizzly, and some of the other sponsors I've worked with. And so what was surprising is that I kind of pivoted it to physical therapy and fitness related stuff, mainly because my good friend Kyle Brown, who's a physical therapist, started just like making cool content, and I wanted to like help him with that. And then we sort of just took it from there, and it was a pivot that was just more interesting to me because there was a void in skating. I mean, there are a million different little merch brands, but like a brand that's more connected with maintaining, you know, good physical health for skating, helping aging skaters know what to do when they like get injuries or just want to maintain some like basic strength. that didn't exist really. So we wanted to I kind of pivoted and to focus on that.
Yeah, I think good business sense with people is they go with what seems to be working at the time. Like you still have to have an idea of this is what I want my branding to be, and you have to stay true to that. But the people that a lot of times that fail in business is because they're too stubborn and what they want to do, they're like, no, this is just what I'm going to do no matter what. And all the signs are telling them that that's not working. Yeah. Sometimes you kind of have to shift. Like when I opened my skateboard shop, I'm like, oh, well, we'll sell snowboards too. That'll kind of help float us through the winter. And I found real quick that no, snowboards are ridiculous expensive just to stock. And I'm in a town that people don't make that much money. We're not in a big city. In order to afford like a new snowboard from any like real big brand, those people buy them from wherever their actual big hill is that they go to, which isn't in my town. So I just kind of had to push that out. But that opened other opportunities I started closing during the winters. And like this past winter I closed and I went to Puerto Rico and painted a mural instead. I'm like, cool. That's not what I would have thought I was going to do earlier on, but that's what I'm doing now. I want you to share that skate video playlist for me, the one you talked about off mic. I would love to have that list in my phone because listening to skate video parts, that's like well, for one, I paint a lot. So having a whole more music to listen to when I'm painting would be ideal. But I love listening to the music from skate videos. Skate videos are what really introduced me to a ton of different artists. I think my music selection and my music taste would be much more limited if I didn't watch a lot of skate videos. Specifically, like the Girl and Chocolate videos and stuff growing up had a really big mixture. It wasn't just hip hop. It was like kind of all over the place. So let's get back to old friends. So you started by making some hats and stuff. When did you meet, or how did it work out with your friend that made it go into like physical therapy? Was it because you got injured on something and then you guys were doing physical therapy and talked about it? Or was he like did you guys go into the business from the beginning together? How did that work out?
So Kyle is one of my oldest friends from the Napa Valley. He was like the older guy in a town over that I skated with and kind of took me under his wing and took me on my first trip to Thailand, and we've just been skating together forever. So when I had my knee injury, I tore my meniscus and had surgery and just had to do some PT to come back from that. He hooked me up with some light programs and resistance bands workouts and stuff. And I just always rolled with a foam roller traveling. Like I just was super into foam rolling and just always had one. And I just was thinking, it'd be fun to make a foam roller with some bands inside and like little caps. And so Kyle had got his Instagram kind of popping off, and I just thought it would be a cool way to like hype up his Instagram and try to like test out this product. And there was just a really good response. Like they sold through super fast. And then that was kind of it. It was just like this one thing. And then we just sort of built off that. All right, what else could we make? What else could we slap a little logo on? And it was just interesting learning how to get that sort of product made, bring it over, find manufacturers in China, ship it over. And that was like a whole learning experience in itself too. And some things didn't really hit, others did. And, we still sell a good amount of the PT packs and resistance bands. And then the evolution from that, which is what I've been focusing on the last few years, is video and podcast content. That's like a subscription model, because that is like where his Instagram became so vital to the skate world, I would say. Like he's actually offering information about like rehab and studies behind what he's saying, but he doesn't have a really he doesn't have an opportunity to flesh it out in its full entirety that he needs to. An Instagram post that's a minute long with like a little caption isn't really sufficient. So I thought it'd be cool to like, let's focus on specific injuries. Let's do like a Q&A podcast that really answers all the burning questions that like anyone going through these injuries might have. And then a video that has like at home rehab programs you can do. And so, we tested it out with Patreon, which was perfect because you can just like make one in a day and then people can like start supporting you. And then now we've just turned it into a website that is a little bit easier to navigate. Because once you're a couple years deep with Patreon, I don't know if you use that.
Yeah, I use Patreon.
There's your content's hard to like dig up, and ours is like essentially timeless, like a meniscus program, an ACL prevention program, a ankle sprain program. Like it's not top, like it doesn't matter if it was made 3 years ago or a year ago. And I feel like Patreon sort of is more for like the creator constantly churning out content, you know?
Yeah,
like,
it's chronological versus
Exactly.
yours. People are going to look up, I just hurt my ankle.
Yeah,
So I want to look up
exactly.
that exact thing.
Yeah. And it was easier to, like, let's say you have a video about plantar fasciitis, you know, there's like a few exercises you can use, and it's easier to break those down individually so you can like skip around in like essentially like chapters. And there just wasn't really that offering with Patreon to like really sort of customize things.
Sure.
So yeah, so that's just been the journey with that, and it's been really cool just because people are, you know, find that it's helpful, and that's like the best thing.
What's been your most successful method, or like what have been the challenges as well to get people to actually sign up for stuff like that? Because subscription-based content is obviously where things have been going for some time, and everyone's pushing it. That's kind of the problem, right? Is everyone's pushing it.
Right.
How are you able to get people to actually follow through and sign up for things like that? Because even through like my show, I do a Patreon, right? So like this episode will go on ahead of time and whatever, and people go on there. But I noticed that a lot of people, they don't want to do that. But if I'll put on like my social media, like on my Instagram story, like, hey, I'm in New York, like I'm doing this show, if you want to make a donation, here it is. A lot of people will do one-time type donation things, but it is hard to convince people to actually follow through with the subscription.
Yeah, I mean, it's especially in skateboarding, no one wants to pay for anything,
Right.
of all things content, you know, like it's just, you can't even, skate videos that used to take years and then you'd eventually sell for a video, you know, a DVD, VHS, or eventually iTunes, now is just expected to be free. So
they don't even make
of
DVD
all
copies.
Things, yeah, of all things, like our audience it's a hard sell. So it's been challenging. I mean, I feel like just creating good teasers on Instagram has been the best for us. We've played with some, you know, Facebook advertising and stuff, but not too heavily. I kind of wanted to focus on like building out this website first, which I only just launched like last month or a month and a half ago. So, yeah, I mean, I wasn't too crazy about the marketing something on the social channels that then bring you to another website like Patreon that's like a little bit confusing and hard to navigate. So it's been a challenge for sure. Like I wouldn't say I have like the answer for it, you know, because those ads don't really give, if you do the ads, the metrics aren't exactly there to like say, hey, this was what like actually got someone here to pay. So it's kind of like, well, we put out some cool stuff that day and then eventually they found it, or they might have been, you know, sent a link by a homie. Like it's not really, the analytics weren't really there to know for sure. So it's been challenging, but we have it set up now where I'm not really expecting people to just pay long-term for good. That's sort of not the model. It's kind of like, if you need it just for a month, you know, give us $12 and then, you know, if you cancel it, you cancel it. I get it.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, did you built the whole website though,
Yeah.
right? How did you kind of learn how to do a lot of that stuff? Was it just over time? Like, you know, you want to create old friends, you don't have a budget to pay somebody, so you'll just do it when you have free time? Or like, how did you learn how to do those things?
Yeah, just totally winging it and leaning on people who've done similar things. There's a lot of people in the skate world who, you know, wear multiple hats like that.
Yeah, I think when you are a skateboarder, you realize that, I mean, for you, right? That's how you build a career, is you do tricks nobody has done at spots that they haven't been done, right? So you can't just look at what other people have done. You have to kind of develop your own thing. And that's how it is with brands and everything else. But I think if you can develop that mindset of, just because you haven't done something or you haven't seen someone do something doesn't mean you can't do it.
Right.
You have to develop that mindset of like, well, I can. And that happened with books and stuff too. So let's talk about your books a little bit. I asked you if you had a degree as an English major because you now have 2 novels out. You had sent me some copies to my store, which thank you so much for that. I appreciate it. Been showing everybody.
Nice.
Tell us about the books a little bit. What are they about? And, you know, why did you choose to write them?
So I've always been a big reader. I'm from a family of readers and writers. And I, you know, as I started traveling, I started getting more into writing. You know, really college, that wasn't my thing. Everything in a sociology degree involves writing, but creative writing, I should say. And, you know, I started publishing some of the trips I went, you know, articles from the trips I went on, and just getting more into the practice of it. I started a blog where I'd write about skate videos I liked. And I wanted to write a show, like a TV show. And so my friend Nick Henry and we wrote a pilot for a show that we thought could be funny to film and to make ourselves. Low budget, we just wanted to barge it. And it was just a really fun process, like creating characters and just figuring out a plot. And we didn't get around to filming it. It was just it's like a scheduling nightmare, and we both sort of went separate ways. But it got kicked the gears into motion of that sort of creating a fictional universe. And I started working on a short that I eventually just expanded into a novel, and that was Top of Mason. And that was just also a reaction to not really liking the types of movies that are set in the skate world, and they're not really being books. I mean, there are some books, but they are usually not so much about like pro skating. They're more sort of about a skateboarder character or a I don't know, sort of a coming of age story about like a young kid.
Yeah.
And I wanted to focus on a story about a aging skater, someone who had dedicated his life to trying to be pro, and it didn't work out. So you sort of learn about the skate industry from that perspective. And he's just going through a really bad breakup and some gnarly shit that is all set in San Francisco, and inspired by some of my friends who've gotten into some, like, you know, let's say drug problems in San Francisco. And so that was that was really the motivation. Like, it just doesn't exist, and I wanted to see if there'd be a audience for it. And so, I just put it out myself. I tried to get it published, but I didn't find anyone to really like get behind it with me. I have, no fictional writing out there. Like, I don't really have a, I think it's just a challenging world to enter. So
Sure.
I was just like, well, I have an audience. I think the skate channels will help. Let's just see if people want to buy this. And it did pretty well. Like, it did well enough that I was encouraged to keep writing the second one I'd already started, which I just put out recently, and it's called Off Clark.
Yeah, so I know you've talked about it on other shows, but still, I think most people don't understand how it works. A lot of people have that idea of like, well, if I don't have any creative writing experience and I don't have a portfolio to be able to pitch, because really it's just like movies or anything else. It's like, well, what else have you done? Mm-hmm. You're like, well, I'm a skateboarder. Well, publishing companies don't have a perspective of why that would mean you're good at writing. So they don't care. And they're like, well, our skateboarder is going to buy this or whatever.
Yeah.
How did you actually put it out? Thankfully, in today's world, we have different tools available, right? You don't have to invest in 10,000 physical copies that sit at your apartment or whatever. But how did it actually work even with the first book, and how's it working right now?
Yeah, so I had, it's funny. I had found this company called Lulu like 10 or 15 years ago because my mom had written a novel that was never published, and I just wanted to print her one copy for her birthday.
Cool.
I had a friend design a cover and, just printed her a one-off. And that company had always stayed in the back of my mind, like, oh, that was really easy and cheap. And so when I knew that I was going to put it out myself, I started testing out versions of how it would look with this company. And I still didn't think I was going to use them for like actually putting it out. It was more just like, oh, I get a one-off copy. The type looks all right. Or like the sizing of the margins looks okay. Like, it was just and testing the covers. It was just like to test it. And then I discovered that they had a app that integrates into Shopify, which is what I use for Old Friends, that's print on demand. So then it was just like this no-brainer, like, oh my God, like all I have to do is upload this file into Shopify, and then people buy the book, and then the book just gets made. And it was just like whoa, like I totally thought I was going to have to invest in a bunch of books, not really know how many to get, and it was going to be this nightmare. And then this just made it like a no-brainer. So it was just like seamless. I upload a PDF, and then when someone buys a book, it gets printed and shipped there, like in really an impressive amount of time, like all over the world too. Like people will order the book from France thinking it's going to be like a month, and they'll get it in like 4 days.
Yeah.
It's like, how I don't even know how they're doing it. I'm assuming they have print shops all over the world, but yeah, it was a really great experience. Yeah. And it still is. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, even now, like starting a brand, I have kids come into my shop all the time, right? Because I own the skate shop. And so people come in and they're like, I want to start a board company. I want to start a t-shirt company or whatever. They always come to me because I'm the point person for them in their minds of like, he would know. And it's cool that I can explain to them, like, you can, I talk to them, a lot of times it'll be like a parent will mention it to me when their kid's buying a board, like, hey, little whoever wants to do this because he's too embarrassed to ask. And I tell them, dude, like $100. and you can go print some t-shirts. Like that's
Yeah.
really all it takes. You don't need to have a big investment at all to be able to start a brand and to start learning about how all these things work. It's a lot more of an endeavor to write a book and upload it and do all that stuff. But in general, to just like start a brand and start learning about how that stuff works, it's so readily accessible these days for anything. And me too. Like I do, podcast merchandise and stuff where it's like, I don't know how many I'm going to sell or whatever. I don't want to print a whole bunch of them, have them sitting around. So I do Shopify through my website too. It sucks that they take a percentage, but everyone's got to get paid. So like, I understand it. So you wrote these books with a different knowledge. Like, I mean, if I watch a skateboarding movie, it's the same way. I'm a skateboarder. So I see it and I'm like Grind or whatever as an example, where it's like, okay, you guys don't actually know what you're talking about in this movie at all. It's entertaining, but you don't know what you're talking about. For you had a in-depth knowledge of how all this stuff works that none of us otherwise are going to see unless we read this book. I want to hear about some stories from you though, because I know that you base some of these things off of other people and other experiences that you've seen. What's a story of an experience that you had that was a little bit crazier when you're in another country, whether it was like scary or it just got you into a difficult situation that looking back on it now is like, whoa, that was quite the life experience?
Yeah, I mean, shout out my friend Patrick Wallner, who I met when I was 21 or 22 in Thailand, and he became just this great friend who invited me on trips to places I never would have considered going, especially for skating, like India, Bangladesh, all these countries around the Middle East and parts of Asia and, like Western China and just places I never would have considered. So he roped me into a number of trips, which all have everything ended up fine, but there were hairy moments for sure. And the second book is a little inspired by some of those trips. I sort of allude to it a little bit in this new one off Clark. What's fun about the books is I get to fictionalize things and just make them crazier or more interesting than they actually were. But to answer your question, one that sticks out was when we went to Iran in 2013 or 14. I was really nervous. Everyone was really nervous. Iran is sort of one of those places where you say you're going and your family is like, no, don't go. They drag people through the streets, or it's, it's going to be terrible. And so I was nervous, but everything seemed to be working out. We just had to pay a little bit extra as the Americans. We had to pay $1,200 extra for a visa. And it was sort of like, okay, that's weird, but whatever. But when we arrived in the country, Kenny Reed and I were intercepted by this guide who basically was like, no, you got to come with us. You can't be with your friends. We were all meeting together. There was probably 10 of us meeting with these local Iranians too. And they just swept us off. This guy just took us and took us to a hotel, and it was just like, what the fuck is happening? And it turned out the only way we as Americans were able to go to Iran was with a guide who was going to be with us at all times. And that was just, it's how it works. That's the diplomatic relations of our two countries. So we didn't get to skate. We couldn't do anything that wasn't sanctioned by this travel agency. And it was just kind of a big old letdown. Meanwhile, our friends who were all from Europe were just having a grand old time skating, staying with the locals, and just almost like they were anywhere else. And so that was one of those where it's just damn, that was kind of it ended up being an interesting experience. And we got an experience of Iran that we wouldn't have had otherwise, from a very cultural tourist perspective. Sure. So it was good. But it was one of those where it was just oh man, this is not what we expected at all.
I've heard stories of skaters. I want to say I heard one of Gons once skating at an airport or whatever, and then it becoming kind of a crazy thing. Do you ever get concerned when you've traveled to some of these other countries that what you're doing is criminal activity? That is skateboarding, right? It is illegal pretty much everywhere because a lot of what you're doing is damaging or endangering people, even if it's in a small manner or whatever. Have there ever been times where you're in some country skating some building and somebody comes up, some kind of official or a cop or whatever, doesn't speak the same language, where you're concerned of, when am I going to go to jail? Is this going to be a Brittany Griner situation? Or
yeah. I mean, it's definitely crossed our minds. Usually we have a guide who speaks the language, and we're not just totally incapable of communicating. Most of the time they're just confused, especially if it's places where skateboarding has not been seen. Yeah. They're just sort of curious. and they're just shooing you off. I'd say that a feeling, not so much of like, I'm going to go to jail, but like when you're getting kicked out by people who are security guards and they're not necessarily like, oh, this is just my job. Like they take it personally and they like call their friends and they like want to fight. That's like a situation that's a little bit more like sketchy and like, we got to get the hell out of here, because I do not want to like get in some kind of a brawl with this security guard who's just like taking it really personal that we're not leaving, you know? Because sometimes you're skating, like in Kazakhstan, we're skating a monument and it's just like a beautiful skate spot, and like who cares if we're skating it, but you know that people are telling us this guy's there to kick us out or there to like keep things in line, and we're not leaving, and then he's just like, this is like, you're insulting me, like fuck you. And so those kind of situations have never escalated, but they're the ones that have like made me the most nervous. But everyone we travel with, or I've traveled with, is always really respectful and aware, and like you just kind of have to read the situations as they come.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, there's signals that you can see with people, and obviously cultures are very different, right? Like when I went to Japan, I don't remember how many years ago, 8 years ago, I expected to see a lot of skateboarding, and there really wasn't any skateboarding at the time. At least I didn't see it. It was very like in certain spaces, right? Very funneled. And my understanding of it was because like if you were to get arrested, it would be a really, really big deal. Like it's a huge problem culturally for your family and everything if that happens, versus in America, no one really thinks anything of it. At least for something like skateboarding, they don't think too much of it. So over there, I'd be like, whoa. It would be kind of a big deal to get in trouble with the cops skateboarding, you know?
Totally, yeah.
And depending on which country, right? If you're skating a monument, you know, in America, a lot of times it's like, well, it's just skateboarders. You know, if we see a security guard, it's like, well, they're not the real cops. They'll call the real cops. They'll tell us to leave. So we have an extra 5-10 minutes or whatever. But that's not necessarily the case, depending on which country that you're in. Yeah,
totally. I'd say the worst feeling is when you're in countries, like this happens every time you get kicked out in Mexico, is they just want money. And a lot of places just want money. And it's this sort of like waiting game. They're threatening, they're going to take you to jail, but like it's clear they just want to get paid. And you're just sort of like trying to negotiate that. And like a lot of times it's the guide helping you, and he's just sort of like not saying anything and kind of waiting, and more cops are showing up, and you're like, are we all like getting wrapped? Like, is this a bad situation? And then it's like, oh no, just give them like $100, you know? And that's just always like a shitty feeling too, you know?
Right. Well, I suppose you got to get the street smarts for traveling in general with that stuff. You've had a long career. I know like your last ender of textures was like insane. And you know, I'm sure you've talked about it a lot. Switch backside 360 kickflip down a stair set. I think it was like an 8. I've never seen that trick on anything that I can recall from anybody. Are you the only one that you're aware of that's ever done that down any stair set bigger than like a 3? Like I can't recall ever seeing it. I'm a pretty big skate nerd. I've watched a lot of skating.
Yeah. I can tell you exactly who's done it, because I've been like obsessed with this trick for, 15 years basically. But Shane O'Neill's done it down a cool little gap. It was his last trick in this video part, Shane Goes, I think, his first skate mental.
Okay. I've seen that video part. I don't remember that offhand. Then again, he skates so much switch that maybe at the time I didn't realize it was switch.
Yeah. So he did a really clean one down a little gap in Australia. And then Russ Milligan did one. Trevor McClung's done one, but usually off like wedges and bumps. So I hadn't seen it down a stair set. And so it was a quest of mine for like a decade plus to just get one in the streets. And it was technically a 9 stair.
Oh, it was a 9 stair. Okay. I miscounted. My
it's
bad.
It's basically like a 7 stair, but it's in its real height. It's really small. And like the last stair is kind of like a half. So it's like an 8.5. But yeah, I'm calling it a 9. It's called the Brick 9. So yeah. Did it down 9 stair, I can die happy.
I think that counts. So now, I mean, obviously, like, especially because you take care of yourself, skating is going to last for a decent while longer. But what are your goals with skateboarding for the rest of your career? I mean, you'll skate, I'm sure, forever. You never really stop skating. But what are your goals as a professional skateboarder? Like, what's left?
Yeah. So knock on wood, I'll stay skating for a good amount of time. I mean, I don't know. I didn't expect to be in my mid 30s still jumping at the same level basically that I was when I was in my early 20s. So we'll see. I mean, I just love the process of putting out video parts. I think about this a lot. Like I put myself through hell when I skate most of the time because I'm usually trying something I've never done before. And it's this weird thing where it's like, all right, if I'm going to go skate and push myself. I'm going to want it filmed. If I'm going to want it filmed, I want to do something challenging. And like, that's what I want out of skating, whether it ends up in a video part, whether I just put it on Instagram, like that's my relationship to it. So I don't know if I ever want this period where I just like soul skate, you know. It's an interesting thing that I think about a lot. Like, obviously it's going to come 40s, probably maybe even late 30s, where it just feels better to just go back to the basics or relearn tricks or do things. But the chances are I'm just going to keep trying the hardest things I can think of when I feel inspired to, or when I'm healthy enough. And so, I mean, that's basically what I want out of skating. I want to just like keep being able to document hard tricks and like have fun. I mean, of course, like skating a skate park is a joyous experience, and I just want that too. But if that was the only thing I was doing with skating, I don't know if I'd get the same satisfaction. Like, there's something really fulfilling about coming up with an idea. It doesn't have to be something no one's ever done, just something I've never done. Yeah. And trying to do it until I do it.
Yeah.
And
I mean, it's like cool. It's cool with like people like Heath Kirchart, right? Who kind of like ride off into the sunset after like a banger part. And then there's other people that kind of hang on to it and go and go and go and go and go and still have their name on a board forever, which is fine. You know, they have big fan bases for a reason, and they've done a lot of things. Yeah. But usually by now, and you're not old, like we're pretty similar in age, but usually by now people transition their skating away from jumping. Yeah. You know, rather than continue to jump until forever.
Yeah. And jumping is a thing I definitely will stop, because the problem with jumping is like, I mean, if I'm conditioned and in a mode where I'm jumping a lot, my recovery is pretty good, but it takes a while to come back from after a day of jumping down a 12 stair. And that's not a good feeling, because then you just can't skate. So jumping, like I'm jumping isn't my goal to like do that forever, because it just fucking destroys your body. Oops, sorry. But I will want to do the technical side always. And then there's a whole world of transition that I've just like never really pushed myself too hard with, that I enjoy. And so there's any direction you can take it in, really.
So we got to find a vert ramp, and then next time I come out to New York, we can skate the vert ramp together, so I don't have to feel so pathetic when I skate next to you.
There it is.
I can cruise around those a little bit.
Yeah.
Nothing fantastic, but I could at least cruise around on it.
There you go. Yeah.
So what are you going to do then? Like for me, what I've noticed with my career is my skate shop turned 9 last week. So Congrats. Thank you. Been doing it a long time. And I found with myself that I kind of reached a point around the 5-year mark where I'm like, cool, I'm proud of and like happy with where I got with that. And I don't necessarily have like higher peaks I want to reach. Like I don't want to have more than one shop, and I don't really want it to be like a bigger shop. It's kind of like what it needs to be, right? So then different goals kind of pop up, which is like the show. Art's a really big part of my life, and I think art has kind of taken the place that skateboarding took for me, as far as like the motivation and like the excitement and stuff. Skateboarding now has really taken a backseat of, I skated 6 times in the last week and a half, so I'm still skating. But it's just become a like, I'm okay with just getting whatever feels good that day when I go to the park, and that's kind of it. You know, I would go film a trick, but I don't feel a ton of motivation in that kind of way. Versus with like art, I've been seeing myself progress, and I get more opportunities that'll pay more, or like this mural opportunity is bigger, or this brand wants to work with me on this thing. And it's exciting because I don't see an end. There's no real ceiling. My body's not going to give out. It's exciting of like, I know that my career is going to continue to go in that direction, you know, at least for a period of time. For you, skateboarding, I'm sure at this point, if you're not having money coming in from these board sponsors and stuff, this is purely because you want to do this while you still can. But as far as the actual career side, you have old friends, you have the books. What are your goals, and where do you want to go over the coming years with that stuff? Or is there some other major goal that's like, you know, on the back burner or something?
Percolating.
Yeah.
Yeah, I always have a million different little ideas. Yeah. But definitely the writing is what has been the most exciting to get a response from and want to continue doing. So if, you know, my dream scenario were to work out, writing these books or other projects would be what I'd want to be focusing on the most. I just find it's really fulfilling in a similar way that skating is, because it goes from just like an inception that's just yours to then a product that people are interacting with. And there's something just amazing about putting, you know, I put a lot of time into the books, but at the same time I don't. Like I put in like half an hour or an hour a day, you know, like if I'm having a good week.
Sure.
Like it's not something I'm like really focusing on. Like I do it in the morning and then I'm doing a million other things that are more time consuming. So if I were to shift focus and really be able to put more of myself into the writing, that would be a goal for sure.
Do you want to only do creative writing in that way, or do you have other interests in doing other things, such as like I interviewed Michael Sieben not long ago, right? And he's done a lot of the writing for Thrasher and stuff.
Yeah.
Has there been interest in kind of diversifying what kind of writing you do, or do you purely like being in a fictional world of novels and creating a story like that?
Right now, fiction is what interests me most. I've attempted more like journalistic styled portfolio. I mean, just like profiles basically. And that was kind of appealing. But when I set my mind to writing those kind of things, like I'm just way more daunted by it for some reason. Like,
Sure.
And so right now, that doesn't really interest me. But in time it could, for sure.
Do you think it's partially just because you like working for yourself and kind of on your own timelines and that type of thing? I know for me, like it would be really hard after all these years of working for myself to directly work for a company that I had to reach certain deadlines. I'm very self-motivated. I'll always be working. But I think if like, even with the show, like I can put it out on my own timeline, which will be fast, but I don't have to have it by any specific thing because somebody else has a narrative that I have to do. Do you think about that at all or not really?
I mean, I think it would be a great experience to work with an editor or have assignments, and then that kind of pressure would be different, and maybe I would like that. But at the moment, since I don't have that, that's not really. I'm not really sure how to answer because I just don't know. You know?
Sure.
So it could be something I really enjoy and thrive with, but for the time being, because they are these essentially passion projects that I just like put my creative energy into when I can. That's what I like.
Which has been pretty much your career your whole life, right? I mean, with skate videos, you have to have deadlines for certain things, but even so, your individual video parts, they're part of something bigger, but they're still kind of your own thing. You know, you have your own trick list that you go towards or whatever. You've kind of always been creating, you know, your own stuff your whole career. And that bleeds then into the entrepreneurship side, which is cool to see skateboarders do. Because a lot of times, you know, I mean, you're well aware, skateboarders are done with their skating career and they're not really sure what to do. So I have a lot of appreciation for people like Mike Mo or, you know, whoever, these people that start brands and do things while they're still active as a pro and start looking at like, well, what do I want to do next? You know, I can take these things that I've learned and I can put them into this realm. That and like using it when you still have a personal brand that is still like there, right? Like Instagram being an incredibly helpful tool for people. You know, you have a personal brand that even when Organika goes under, Walker Ryan's still there. Right. Yeah. Or if the Circa thing falls through, Walker Ryan's still there. If you're not on SOVRN anymore, Walker Ryan's still there. Like that Instagram page doesn't disappear. And that can transition over time to all of a sudden, like, you know, maybe 10 years down the line, you have more people focused on your writing than on anything else. But that brand is still there and continues. I mean, based on that social media, but in general, like that brand continues.
Yeah, definitely.
We're getting towards the end of the show. I like to ask the same question at the end of every episode. Cool. And that is, when you do things that you're passionate about for a living, you get to have really unique experiences, usually ones that aren't money focused at all. You know, whether it's traveling to this place or you get to work with this person, or you had an effect on somebody in some kind of a way. What's an experience that you're really grateful for that happened only because you chose to pursue, well, I guess your passion for multiple things in this case, but skateboarding, writing, one of those things?
I mean, most experiences in my life have come from it, but I would say namely just getting to meet the woman who would become my wife, Whitney. It all sparked from I'll go on a trip to the Mediterranean for a Red Bull. Like, why not? I'll go. And there was an error in my plane flight, which led to they flew me round trip from Philadelphia rather than back to San Francisco. And rather than changing it, I just said, you know what, I'll just stay on the East Coast for a little while. I think they're emptying the Love Fountain. I want to try to switch backside flip it, so I'll just stay in Philly. But I instead went to New York, met my wife, went back to Philly, got the switch backside flip, and then started dating Whitney. And that definitely is like the best experience.
You met her in Philly?
Well, so I was just supposed to go to California,
yeah,
but since I flew from Europe back to Philly,
so
I just stayed on the East Coast. Yeah, so I flew to Philly, went to New York, spent like basically a couple weeks went back to Philly, did the trick, and then just stayed in New York. And yeah.
And you decided to stay because of her.
I mean, I eventually went back to California, but we stayed in touch, and it just changed the course of my life. So
yeah, and now you're going to have a kid, right?
Yeah.
Is this going to be your first child?
Yeah.
So everybody is getting older and having kids. My kids are 6 and 10, so like I'm a little more experienced in that. But even seeing like Sibo Walker's Instagram and his new video part, like having his kids in it and stuff, it's exciting. It's cool for the next chapter of life. Are you nervous about that at all?
Yeah, I'm a little nervous, but I'm also really excited.
Are you going to slow down the travel? Like what? How is it going to change things for you, think?
Well, it's changing everything in the immediate because we're moving out of New York, and but it's not. I mean, we just booked tickets to Portugal for September, so we're gonna bring the little dude along with us if everything goes right. So I don't think it'll actually slow anything down. We're gonna be basically homeless for the first year, staying with family and going on trips. So that's our yeah. I don't know. We're gonna try to not let it slow anything down. Awesome. At least before the kid, they got to go to school and stuff.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you have plenty of time. And I think giving your child a different world experience, even when they're that young, it really does affect the way that they grow up. I was talking off mic with my brother-in-law about, people with generational wealth and stuff, how I don't think it actually helps their children at all. But I think people who take their kids traveling and showing them and I like to think of this about myself too, showing my kids that you can do something that you just enjoy for a living. It doesn't have to be a traditional path. I think that really opens their minds and opens a lot of doors for them of like, what do they really want to do?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I think that stuff's really important.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate you making this happen. I saw you post the other day, the tallest ledge in the world. So I really want to go skate that. So hopefully I'll find time this week while I'm here.
Hit me up for the pins. Let me know. I got them all.
Absolutely.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of The Passion Pod. We hope you enjoyed it as much as we did. We'll see you soon.